Imagine boarding a first-class flight, ticket in hand. Your mind focused on a crucial meeting that could change everything, only to be told you don't belong in your seat. This isn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It's the story of Malcolm Everhart, a calm, composed black CEO who faced public humiliation simply for claiming what was rightfully his. What happens when quiet dignity meets loud entitlement, when privilege demands space and integrity refuses to yield? How far would you go to protect your self-respect against a system built to silence you? On Oceanic Flight 308, a seemingly routine journey spiraled into a battle of respect, power, and justice that shook an entire airline to its core. What unfolds is a story about courage, resilience, and the slow, hard fight for equality in spaces where bias still lingers even at 35,000 feet. Are you ready to witness a moment where quiet strength becomes a catalyst for systemic change, where one man's refusal to move sets in motion an industry-wide reckoning? If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join us as we dive into a powerful journey that will challenge what you think about fairness, respect, and belonging. The gentle chime above Gate 27 signaled the beginning of pre-boarding for Oceanic Flight 308 to Washington, D.C. It was barely 6:15 a.m. Los Angeles International was already buzzing, but the air around the VIP section felt strangely still. Filtered jazz floated in from the lounge speakers. Baristas murmured softly over espresso machines. It was the kind of morning that looked calm but hid a storm in waiting. Malcolm Everhart stood quietly near the boarding queue. He wasn't checking his phone, wasn't glancing around impatiently like most of the other first-class passengers. He simply stood there, one hand resting on the handle of his leather briefcase, his mind already far beyond this airport. His suit was understated tailored charcoal gray with a light blue shirt that caught the light as he moved. No flashy watch, no entourage, no noise, just a man traveling alone with the weight of something big tucked neatly in his carry-on. "Good morning, sir." The gate agent smiled as she scanned his boarding pass. "Good morning." Malcolm nodded warmly. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, a flight attendant stepped aside to greet him. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Everhart," she said. "You're in 1A today. Let us know if you need anything." "Thank you," he replied, offering a brief smile. He walked to the front of the cabin and took his seat. Seat 1A, a corner of calm in the polished cocoon of Oceanic's redesigned first-class cabin. Leather seats, matte wood armrests, a personal lamp arched over his shoulder like a reading partner. Malcolm didn't immediately pull out his tablet. Instead, he sat still for a moment and let his eyes wander. The empty seat next to him, the carefully folded blankets, the flight attendant arranging glassware behind the curtain. Everything precise, measured, designed to suggest control. But even here, especially here, Malcolm knew how quickly that illusion could be broken. He exhaled slowly and reached into his satchel. Out came a sleek tablet filled with slides, charts, notes. Tomorrow, he'd be speaking in front of lawmakers, tech executives, and government advisors at the Federal Summit on Algorithmic Integrity. His keynote was titled Unseen Bias, Unmeasured Harm. The irony wasn't lost on him. He adjusted his seat slightly, crossed one leg over the other, and tapped through his presentation, his fingers gliding with practiced ease. Behind him, the rustle of boarding grew louder. Overhead, bins opened and slammed. Greetings were exchanged. Laughter bubbled up from somewhere in row 3. He barely noticed. He was in flow. Then came a voice, soft, unsure. "Excuse me, sir." Malcolm looked up. A young woman, maybe early 30s, stood just inside the cabin. She looked exhausted. In one arm she held a baby carrier. The other gripped the handle of a duffel bag. "Would you mind watching this for 1 second?" she asked, motioning to the carrier as she struggled to reach the bin above. "Of course," Malcolm replied without hesitation. He stood, gently took the carrier, and held it securely as the woman shifted her bag into the overhead bin. "Thank you so much," she said, breathless but grateful. "No problem," Malcolm said, handing the carrier back. "I'm seat 3B, she added. "My son's first flight, and I'm terrified." Malcolm smiled gently. "Then he's in good company." The woman chuckled as she moved down the aisle. Malcolm sat back down. That was the kind of morning it had been. Small interactions, quiet kindnesses, no fanfare, just human moments. 10 minutes passed. The boarding zone cleared. The final passengers trickled in. Malcolm's seat remained undisturbed, until a hush rolled down the aisle like a wave. He noticed it immediately. Not sound the absence of it. A presence, the click of heels, the scent of something expensive, the crackle of tension that always followed entitlement dressed in couture. Malcolm didn't turn around, but he didn't have to. He'd felt this before. It wasn't personal, but it always was. He kept his eyes on the tablet. His posture relaxed. The woman passed him and stopped just beside 1A. She didn't speak to him. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she turned to the flight attendant. "There seems to be a problem," she said. "That's my seat." Her voice was soft, but it landed like ice water on the carpet. The flight attendant looked down at the manifest, then at Malcolm. She hesitated. Malcolm raised his eyes for the first time and met her gaze calm, unbothered. He said nothing. The attendant glanced back at the woman, who was now tapping her manicure against the armrest of 1C. "I always sit in 1A, she said flatly. "I fly this route every Monday. Check the notes. My preferences are on file." The attendant nodded nervously and excused herself to the galley. Malcolm lowered his tablet. His chest rose with a slow, silent breath. He had been here before, not on this flight, not in this seat, but here, in this moment, where presence became suspicion, where paid-for access became disruption, where the line between comfort and conflict blurred depending on the color of your skin. And yet, he didn't feel rage. Not yet. Mostly, he felt tired. Still, he sat tall. Stillness was his inheritance. Stillness was his resistance. He looked out the window. The sun had just begun to rise over the tarmac. Orange light spilled across the wing. He blinked once, then turned back to his tablet and resumed reading. Tanya Briggs returned from the galley with the printed manifest clutched tightly in her hand. Her heels barely made a sound on the soft carpet, but the tension in her posture made each step feel louder than the last. She paused just short of seat 1A, eyes flicking between Malcolm Everhart and the woman now standing beside him with folded arms and growing impatience. "Ms. Hale," Tanya said carefully. "Mr. Everhart is indeed listed here. He's in seat 1A. Confirmed." Veronica Hale didn't even blink. "He may be listed," she said coolly, "but that's my seat." The words weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. Every syllable landed with authority, shaped by years of wealth and assumption. "I sit in 1A every week, every Monday. You know this." Tanya's voice lowered instinctively. "I understand. Ms. Hale, and we appreciate your loyalty, but this assignment was booked weeks ago. It's a reserved VIP seat, and Mr. Everhart is a diamond priority guest." Veronica's lips tightened. "So am I," she snapped. The cabin behind them had quieted. The other first-class passengers, now buckled in and pretending not to listen, had shifted slightly in their seats. A man in 2B tilted his laptop screen up, but his eyes didn't leave the scene unfolding ahead. Malcolm stayed still. He didn't turn to look at Veronica. He didn't raise his voice. His hands rested lightly on his thighs, his tablet now in sleep mode beside him. But inside, his thoughts stirred. He remembered a moment, years ago, in a boardroom on the 23rd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. He'd been the only black executive in the room, pitching an algorithm to a panel of skeptical investors. One of them had leaned in and asked, "What gives you the confidence to think you belong at this table?" That same question now hovered in the air above 1A. What gives you the right to sit here? He had no desire to answer it. Not again. Not today. "I'm sorry you're uncomfortable," Malcolm said softly, turning his head just slightly toward Tanya. "But this is my assigned seat. I booked it, I paid for it, and I intend to stay." Tanya hesitated. Veronica didn't. She took a step closer, invading the narrow space between the seats. "I don't think you understand how this works," she said. "I'm not asking for a debate. I'm asking you to move." Her tone was clipped, polished, final. Malcolm raised an eyebrow, just enough to register the shift. He looked up at her, really looked for the first time. Their eyes met. It lasted 2 seconds, but it was enough. Veronica recoiled slightly, as if encountering something unfamiliar. There was nothing hostile in his gaze, no fire, no rage, just clarity, an undeniable presence. "I do understand how this works," Malcolm said, "and I understand when something isn't working the way it should." Veronica turned to Tanya, ignoring him again. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor." Tanya nodded quickly and disappeared toward the galley. Malcolm returned his gaze to the seat back in front of him. Across the aisle, a young woman in 2C tapped quietly at her phone. Her name was Alyssa Montoya. She'd been watching since the first words were exchanged. She wasn't filming. Not yet. But her thumb hovered over the camera icon. She looked at Malcolm, then at Veronica. She recognized this script. She'd seen it before. Different actors. Same stage. She shifted slightly in her seat and pressed record. A few rows back, an older gentleman murmured something under his breath. Malcolm couldn't hear the words, but the cadence was familiar. Dismissive. Impatient. Tired of the delay. Still, no one spoke up. No one said, "Let the man be. Let him stay in his seat." Malcolm closed his eyes for half a second. Not out of frustration, but to center himself. He had a rule. Never let anyone take your calm without asking. It was something his grandfather taught him, long before corporate titles and speaking engagements and keynotes. Your calm is your compass. Keep it steady. He inhaled deeply, slowly. Then Tanya returned this time with another man in tow. "Mr. Everhart," she began. "This is Marcus Dowell, our cabin manager." Marcus extended a hand, firm and perfunctory. "Sir," he said with a practiced smile, "apologies for the confusion. It seems there's been some mix-up regarding seating expectations. We'd be happy to offer you another seat, just a few rows back, and you'll still have access to the full VIP service." Malcolm didn't shake his hand. He looked directly at Marcus. "There's no mix-up," he said. "There's an expectation, but it's not mine." Marcus's smile stiffened. "Well, our crew is just trying to accommodate all of our top-tier passengers. We appreciate your loyalty, but this seat is typically preferred by typically," Malcolm interrupted, "isn't the same as officially. I have a boarding pass. I have a receipt. I have the reservation code." Marcus hesitated, shifted his stance, then glanced at Tanya. Behind him, Veronica stood with her arms crossed, lips pursed in smug anticipation. She tapped her watch again, theatrically. "I have a critical meeting in D.C., she said to no one in particular. "This delay is costing me real money." Alyssa's phone caught every word. Malcolm remained composed, voice level. "I understand you're under pressure," he said to Marcus, "but the only pressure I feel is to maintain my dignity, and I'm not going to compromise it for someone else's preference." Marcus blinked. The air between them felt charged, but it was not volatile. It was composed, steeled. Malcolm adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, smoothed his lapel. He wasn't angry, but he was finished being moved. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a soft voice broke the silence. It came from somewhere in row 3. "I think he's right," the voice said. Heads turned. A woman with silver-streaked hair sat upright in 3A, her tone measured. "I saw him board. He was here before any of us. He's not the one causing the delay." Veronica turned abruptly, eyes flashing. "Excuse me." The woman didn't flinch. "I said what I said." Alyssa's camera shifted to capture the moment. Malcolm looked ahead, didn't smile, didn't nod, but something in his chest felt lighter. The silence that followed was no longer quiet. It was pregnant with reckoning. Just as Marcus opened his mouth to try again, a voice cut through the quiet cabin. It didn't come from the front. It came from just behind Malcolm, a slow, gravelly drawl. "Look, not trying to start anything," the man said, "but maybe the gentleman can just let her have the seat. Some of us got places to be." Malcolm turned slightly. The speaker sat in 2B. Late 50s, silver hair, navy blazer, the kind of face that looked like it spent years giving orders. His voice wasn't aggressive, just casual, like he was asking someone to pass the butter at dinner. Behind him, another passenger in 3D nodded quietly in agreement. It was that nod that pierced deepest, not because of its volume, but because of its history. Malcolm had seen that nod before, in meetings, in classrooms, in job interviews, the unspoken agreement that someone like him should yield, that being reasonable meant being quiet, that being composed meant being invisible. He blinked, slowly, in his chest. Something stirred. Not rage, not yet, but sorrow, a tired, familiar ache that clung to the walls of his ribs like fog. He looked forward again and straightened his back, not in defiance, but in declaration. A gentle reminder that his spine still held. "Sir," Malcolm said, his voice steady, "I have a meeting too, but more importantly, I have a right to the seat I paid for. I'm not here to inconvenience anyone. I just want the same respect you'd want in my place." The man in 2B shifted in his seat. Uncomfortable. Tanya stepped forward again. Her tone clipped. "We're trying to resolve this with minimal disruption. Mr. Everhart, I can offer you seat 4A. Still in premium class, same service." Malcolm turned his head toward her. "There's no disruption," he said, "except the one being made around me." His words weren't loud, but they held weight. Veronica scoffed. "This is absurd," she muttered. "We're holding up an entire plane because he won't switch seats." She looked to Tanya, then to Marcus, searching for backup. Marcus exhaled and pulled out his tablet again, tapping rapidly across the aisle. Alyssa adjusted her phone. She hadn't stopped recording. Her hands were steady now, her eyes sharper. She wasn't just documenting anymore. She was bearing witness. Veronica leaned closer to Malcolm's seat, her tone icy. "You think this makes you principled, holding up 40 people to make a point Malcolm didn't move? I think principle is exactly the reason not to move." His voice, as ever, remained calm, but inside he felt the current shifting. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about being seen, about staying seated in a world that expected him to always stand down. He remembered his father's voice, gravelly and wise, telling him once, as they fixed an old radiator together in their garage some days, "Son, your only act of power is staying put." Captain Thomas Wade entered the cabin a few seconds later. The tension met him like a wall. He was tall, well-kept, in his mid-50s. Veteran of over 3 decades. You could see the wear of long flights in the lines near his eyes. He looked from Malcolm to Marcus to Tanya. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice low. Tanya answered quickly. "Captain, we have a conflict over seat assignment. Mr. Everhart is in 1A with a confirmed reservation. Ms. Hale is requesting the same seat based on her regular travel preference." The captain's eyes locked onto Malcolm. He walked forward and crouched slightly beside the seat. "Sir, I'm just here to help resolve this smoothly," he said. "If you'd be willing to move, we'd compensate you fully and make a note on your account for priority seating on future flights." Malcolm let the captain's words settle. He could feel the entire cabin watching. He could hear a child fussing softly in the rear, the clink of a glass tray in the galley, a cough somewhere behind row 5. He let those sounds hold him steady. "I appreciate the offer," he said quietly, "but I'm not moving. I booked this seat weeks ago. I verified it 3 times today. I'm not giving it up because someone else expects to override my reservation." Captain Wade sighed, stood up. Veronica's arms were still crossed, but now her eyes were tied. She didn't speak, but her silence brimmed with contempt. Captain Wade turned to Marcus. "Let's speak in the galley," he said, as the crew stepped away. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. A woman in 3A whispered, "Why's it always like this?" A man in 2C grunted, "It's just a seat. Why's he making such a big deal?" Another voice answered softly, "Because no one's asking her to give up hers." Malcolm heard all of it. He didn't flinch, but something deep in him shifted. He thought of all the times he'd stayed silent to keep the peace, to be palatable, to not be labeled difficult. He thought of boardrooms, gala dinners, exclusive lounges, and how none of them ever fully embraced him without first asking who he was and why he was there. He thought of his mother, a schoolteacher who spent 30 years reminding children they were worthy, even when the world whispered otherwise. He could almost hear her now. "Stay steady, baby. Make them look you in the eye." And so he sat, one man, one seat, in the middle of a pressure chamber wrapped in leather and champagne service. Across the aisle, Alyssa whispered to herself, "This isn't right." She stopped recording and opened Twitter, not to post, not yet, but to start writing. In the galley, Marcus and Tanya conferred in hushed tones. Captain Wade rubbed his temples. "We've got a schedule to keep. You want to remove him? Marcus glanced down the aisle. He's being calm, but he's not complying. He has the seat, Tanya said, almost under her breath. Marcus ignored her. Let's bring in ground security, he said. Wade frowned. This is going to blow up. It already has, Tanya said quietly. Malcolm sat still as the cabin door hissed shut behind the last ground staff member. The sound echoed faintly down the aisle, punctuating the thick silence that had settled over first class. Passengers shifted in their seats, pretending to focus on screens or folded newspapers, but their eyes kept darting forward, returning to seat 1A. He could feel them, that subtle pressure of being observed, judged in silence. Some eyes held curiosity, others frustration, but few, if any, held empathy. Malcolm wasn't new to this feeling. It was familiar, like a coat he never quite managed to take off, no matter how high he climbed. He didn't resent it, not anymore. But he recognized it for what it was, expectation. The expectation that he would move, that he would yield, that he would give up his seat because someone louder, wealthier, or paler demanded it. But this time, he wasn't moving. Not because he wanted to make a scene, not because he wanted attention, but because everything he had worked for, built, believed in all of it, meant nothing if he couldn't stay seated in a chair he had rightfully earned. In the galley, Captain Wade stood with his arms folded, jaw tight, trying to make sense of the moment. "We're going to be late," he muttered. Marcus paced beside him, glancing toward the front of the plane. "We're already late." Tanya lingered near the curtain, silent. She had been in service long enough to know when a situation was wrong. This wasn't a typical customer complaint. This wasn't someone trying to sneak into a better seat. This wasn't disorderly conduct. This was something else entirely. "I'll talk to him again," Marcus offered. Wade didn't stop him, but his eyes stayed heavy with doubt. Back at 1A, Malcolm adjusted the crease in his slacks. His tablet remained powered off on the tray table. He had barely touched it since Veronica's arrival. He wasn't preparing slides anymore. He was preparing for something else. He looked out the window again. The sun had risen higher now. The light was golden, slanting across the wing and glinting off the tarmac. Everything outside looked peaceful, beautiful, even. It made the dissonance inside the cabin feel more surreal. Marcus returned. "Mr. Everhart," he began, carefully composed, "we understand your position, truly, and we appreciate you as a valued Diamond guest. But, for the sake of everyone on board, we ask you again to consider moving to an alternate seat so we can begin the flight." Malcolm met his eyes. There was no anger, no sarcasm, just resolve. "Mr. Dowell," he said quietly, "I've reviewed your policies. There's nothing that authorizes you to override a reserved first-class seat based on another passenger's preference. I've done nothing wrong. I've been respectful. I've been calm. But I'm not moving." Marcus's mouth pressed into a thin line. Veronica, standing in the aisle with her arms folded, let out a dramatic sigh. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Just move him already. The rest of us have places to be." A murmur passed through the cabin, not loud, but not silent either. Malcolm's gaze stayed steady, his breath even. His heart, though, was thudding with slow, deep rhythm, because he knew the line was approaching, the moment where everything tips, where resistance becomes defiance, where being polite becomes being disruptive, where a man sitting quietly in his assigned seat becomes the villain in someone else's story. Tanya stepped forward now, her voice low but audible. "Sir, please don't make this more difficult than it has to be." Malcolm turned to her, his expression soft but firm. "I'm not the one making it difficult." She hesitated, her lips parting as if to respond, then stopped. Alyssa, still seated across the aisle, raised her phone again. She caught Tanya's words, Malcolm's response, Veronica's body language. Every gesture was becoming a record. Malcolm knew she was recording. He didn't mind, because this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every young black man who had ever been told to step aside, every professional who had been questioned, doubted, dismissed, every person of color who had paid in full but was treated like they owed an explanation. He glanced at Alyssa, gave her the faintest nod. Then he turned to Veronica, not with confrontation, but with clarity. "Ms. Hale," he said evenly, "I understand this seat is important to you. You may feel it belongs to you because you've sat here before, but I booked it, I paid for it, and no preference, no routine, no habit gives you the right to take it from me." Veronica stared at him. A flicker of disbelief crossed her face, as if she genuinely couldn't comprehend someone saying no to her. "This is outrageous," she muttered. Malcolm tilted his head slightly. "No," he said. "This is overdue." Captain Wade returned. Behind him, 2 airport security officers approached the cabin. Every eye in first class turned. Passengers who had tried to stay neutral now leaned forward. Some reached for their phones. Others just watched, breath held. The taller officer, a black man with a serious expression, stepped forward and addressed Malcolm. "Sir, we were called to address a passenger refusing crew instructions. May I see your boarding pass?" Malcolm reached calmly into his jacket, pulled out his wallet, and handed it over. The officer reviewed it, then reviewed the manifest provided by Marcus. The records matched. The officer looked up, his brow furrowing. "He's in the right seat." Captain Wade cleared his throat. "Yes, technically, but he's what the officer asked." Marcus stepped in. "He's being non-compliant with crew requests." The officer looked at Malcolm again. "Sir, have you been disruptive in any way?" "No," Malcolm said. "Have you raised your voice? Threatened anyone?" "No." The officer turned back to Marcus and the captain. "Then why are we here?" Veronica made a sound of disbelief. "You can't be serious," she said. "He's holding the whole plane hostage." The officer didn't answer her. Instead, he looked at Malcolm and handed back the boarding pass. "You have every right to be seated here," he said quietly. "We'll let the captain decide how to proceed." Malcolm nodded. "Thank you." As the officers stepped back, the tension in the air did not lift. If anything, it thickened. Because now the story wasn't just a story, it was being watched, recorded, measured, and everyone knew it. Malcolm looked down at his tablet once more, then closed the cover and folded his hands. He had said what needed to be said. Now, he would wait. Captain Thomas Wade stood just outside the cockpit door, arms folded across his chest, eyes locked on Malcolm Everhart. His lips were pressed in a thin, unreadable line. He had flown thousands of hours, handled emergencies in the sky, weather systems that shook aircraft like toys, medical situations at 30,000 feet. But nothing made him more uneasy than a public standoff, especially one that was rapidly slipping out of control. He hated the cameras. More than that, he hated uncertainty. And here was a man who wasn't yelling, wasn't causing a scene, but was quietly turning a seat dispute into a boiling point. "Marcus," he said under his breath, "either he moves or we delay takeoff. That's the call." Marcus Dowell rubbed his neck. He could feel the sweat building under his collar. Tanya stood just behind him, her face blank but her hands twitching slightly. She wasn't sure who she was supposed to support anymore. Captain Wade stepped forward. "Mr. Everhart," he began, voice calm but forceful. "Let me be clear. This is your last opportunity to comply. We have the right to reassign seats for operational reasons. Either you move to the alternate seating we've offered, or we remove you from the flight." Malcolm looked up slowly. Every movement he made was deliberate, steady, intentional. "Captain," he replied, "I'm not refusing out of stubbornness. I'm refusing because I've followed every rule. I paid for this seat. I boarded early. I confirmed my reservation. The only thing that's changed is someone doesn't like who's sitting in it." Veronica Hale, still standing with her arms crossed, scoffed. She muttered something under her breath, then said more loudly, "This is not about race. It's about respect. I've sat in that seat every week for over a year, and now I'm being treated like I'm the intruder Alyssa Montoya's phone caught every word." She remained still in her seat, thumbs working quickly. She was already drafting a post, already stitching video clips, already organizing what she knew would go viral the moment she pressed upload. She didn't want it to come to that, but part of her also knew this couldn't go unseen. Malcolm glanced across the aisle and gave Alyssa the faintest look. Not a signal, not a plea, just acknowledgement, a recognition of shared awareness. Captain Wade straightened his back. "Sir, we've asked you respectfully. We've explained our position. If you do not move, we will have no choice but to deboard you." Malcolm's voice didn't rise. He didn't shift in his seat. "I'm staying," he said. The words hung in the air like thunder before the storm. Wade turned to Marcus. "Call ground ops," he said. "We're removing him." Gasps rippled quietly through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances. A few phones lifted. A man in 3D whispered, "This is getting out of hand." A woman in 1C looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Veronica smirked. "Finally," she said, "about time someone enforced the rules." Tanya blinked, then slowly stepped back toward the galley, unable to meet Malcolm's eyes. 2 minutes later, the cabin door opened again. 3 airport security officers entered the plane. This time, they weren't hesitant. They moved with a sense of procedure, not aggressive, not rough, but clearly prepared to act. The lead officer, a Latina woman named Officer Navarro, stepped up to seat 1A. "Mr. Everhart," she said, professional and composed, "we're here to escort you off the aircraft. You've been identified as non-compliant with crew instructions." Malcolm breathed in slowly, then spoke clearly enough for everyone around to hear. "I am not non-compliant. I am in my assigned seat. I have followed every policy this airline has published, and I'm being targeted not because of any violation, but because someone believes I don't belong here." Navarro's posture shifted slightly. She hesitated. "Do you have your boarding pass on hand?" Malcolm nodded, already reaching into his coat. He handed it over. Navarro examined it, then turned to Marcus. "His seat is correct." Marcus cleared his throat. "Yes, but Navarro cut him off. You said he refused instructions, not that he was sitting in the wrong place." Marcus stammered. "Look, we're just trying to defuse a tense situation. If he would just agree to move, then maybe you should ask why he's being asked to move at all." Navarro replied. The cabin held its breath. Veronica raised her voice again. "This is absurd. He's clearly being disruptive. He's holding up the entire flight. We have schedules, meetings. He's not special. Alyssa's camera caught it all. The angle, the tone, the irony." Navarro looked back to Malcolm. "Sir, I'm going to ask again. Are you refusing to leave this seat?" Malcolm met her eyes, not with defiance, but with resolve. "I am sitting where I belong, where I paid to be, where I was told to be." Navarro exhaled through her nose. She turned to the others. "This isn't our call. We need a supervisor." A voice came from the cockpit. "No need," Captain Wade said, stepping forward. He looked tired now, older. He wasn't interested in the press, or the recording phones, or even the schedule. He just wanted it to end. "Mr. Everhart," Wade said, his voice heavier now, "I'm ordering you off the plane. Final decision. You can follow voluntarily or be removed." Malcolm stared at him. No words. Just a quiet pause that made the entire plane feel as if it were floating in space. Then, slowly, Malcolm stood. He wasn't quick. He didn't grab his bag in a rush. He moved like someone carrying centuries, each movement precise, grounded, unshaken. He turned toward the aisle, paused, spoke one last time. For anyone watching, he said, voice calm, "Please remember, I was removed from this flight not for breaking the rules, but for following them while black." Then he turned and walked with the officers toward the exit. The cabin remained silent. Every passenger was watching, some ashamed, some indifferent, some stunned. Veronica slid into 1A with smug satisfaction. She placed her handbag on the seat like a trophy. Tanya served her champagne with a trembling hand. Across the aisle, Alyssa quietly pressed upload. The video was titled "Black CEO Removed from First Class After Refusing to Give Up His Seat for a White Woman." The internet would soon erupt. But in this moment, the plane sat idle on the runway, and a man who had done nothing wrong had just been forced to walk away by the time Malcolm Everhart stepped off Oceanic Flight 308 and onto the Borden Bridge. The weight of the moment was still sitting heavy on his shoulders. But he didn't let it bend him. Not in front of the officers, not in front of the crew, not in front of the passengers who had watched in silence as he was escorted off the plane for refusing to surrender what he rightfully paid for. He walked with measured steps, each one deliberate. His leather satchel rested comfortably in his hand, his breath steady. Behind him, the aircraft door sealed with a mechanical hiss. The plane hadn't left the gate, but something else had already taken flight. Inside the terminal, Malcolm stood near a frosted glass wall. His phone buzzed. Once, then again, then it didn't stop. He didn't even have to unlock the screen to know what had happened. The footage had gone live. Alyssa's video high resolution, unedited, brutal in its clarity, had captured everything. The words, the tone, the stares, the removal. It had only been 10 minutes since she pressed upload, and already the ripple had turned into a wave. Hashtags were trending. Seat 1A is removed, while Black Oceanic Injustice let him stay. His inbox was exploding. Mentions, retweets, DMs, journalists, civil rights attorneys, activists, CEOs. His PR director Jamal Wright was calling. He declined the call, then opened the group thread with his executive team. 2 simple words. It's begun. Back on board the plane. Veronica Hale sipped her champagne and crossed her legs as if nothing had happened. She didn't look left or right. She didn't acknowledge the tension still thick in the air. The man in 2B kept his eyes on his laptop, pretending to type. Tanya moved about the cabin in silence, her hands slightly unsteady, 100 questions racing through her mind, none of which she was ready to face. Alyssa Montoya sat in 2C, her phone buzzing nonstop. The numbers were climbing so fast it looked unreal. 50,000 views in less than 15 minutes. 200,000 by the time the cabin door closed. Within the hour, the video would cross 1 million. And Malcolm was no longer in the air, but he had never felt more in control. He made his way to the VIP lounge, where a private booth offered some quiet. Not solitude that wouldn't come for a long time, but enough space to think clearly. He opened his laptop. His fingers moved fast, but his mind was calm. His company, Virelink Technologies, had recently entered a contract negotiation with Oceanic Airlines, a multi-year, multi-million-dollar agreement to develop their next-gen passenger service system, powered by AI. The goal was to eliminate bias in customer interaction, gate assignments, and conflict resolution. He was supposed to finalize that deal in D.C. Now, the deal would be held hostage to something greater, accountability. His executive assistant sent a message. CNN requesting comment, MSNBC too, BBC as well. Do we reply? Malcolm typed back. Not yet. Jamal called again. This time, Malcolm answered, I take it you've seen the numbers. He said, I have. Jamal replied, the video's on every platform. We've got clips circulating in 7 languages. I've got Trevor Noah's people emailing, Al Sharpton retweeting, and the airline's comms team is scrambling. This is wildfire. Malcolm let the silence stretch for a moment. Let it burn, he said. Jamal paused. You want to go public? Not yet. I want the board. Oceanic's Malcolm nodded. Even though Jamal couldn't see him, I'm a 20% shareholder, and they just removed me from my own partner airline for existing in a seat I paid for. Jamal whistled low. You want a shareholder emergency meeting? Within 24 hours, Malcolm said. Notify legal. Tell Liz to prep the documents. Liz Harper, his COO, was already typing. Alyssa, meanwhile, stepped off the plane in D.C. hours later to flashing cameras. Someone had tracked her down, identified her as the original uploader. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The footage spoke loud enough. Oceanic Airlines issued a generic statement by early afternoon. We are aware of an incident aboard Flight 308 involving a seating dispute and are reviewing all crew actions to ensure alignment with company policy and values. The internet tore it apart within minutes. One comment read dispute. He had a boarding pass. Another, you don't get to remove a paying black man for being too composed. By evening, Oceanic stock had dropped 6%. By midnight, it was down 12%. Internal memos leaked. Staff were told not to comment, not to share, not to like, not to repost. Executives panicked because someone had reminded them that power, when silent for too long, eventually speaks loudest when it simply refuses to move. Inside his hotel suite, Malcolm reviewed the footage once again. He didn't need to. He remembered every word, but he watched anyway. To feel it, to sit with it, to make sure he wasn't forgetting why it mattered. Then he sent one last text before closing his laptop for the night. To Tanya Briggs. It read, I remember your face. I saw your hesitation. You still have time to do the right thing. He didn't expect a reply, but he sent it anyway. because power without empathy becomes vengeance. And Malcolm wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking change. And change was coming. Fast. Inside the crew operations room at Washington National Airport, the mood was uneasy. The air felt stale. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a flat glow over the small table where Tanya Briggs sat, hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't said much since they landed. Marcus Dowell stood beside the coffee station, his tie loosened, arms crossed, pacing slightly as if movement could erase what had happened. Captain Thomas Wade hadn't even taken off his hat. He leaned against the back wall, face grim and unreadable, staring at nothing. None of them had spoken to each other since disembarkation. Tanya's phone buzzed again. She didn't check it. She already knew. The notifications hadn't stopped since the wheels touched down. Her name was now trending. Her face was all over Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. Her expression, frozen in time, captured mid-sentence, just as she asked Malcolm Everhart to not make this more difficult than it needs to be. She hadn't looked in a mirror since then. A knock at the door made her flinch. 2 airline executives entered, accompanied by a representative from Human Resources. "Have a seat," said the HR rep, a woman named Clarissa Ung. The door closed behind them. Clarissa placed 3 folders on the table, one for each of them. Her tone was calm, not warm. "This isn't a disciplinary hearing," she began. "But you're here because the incident on Flight 308 has escalated into a corporate crisis." Captain Wade's mouth tightened. "We followed policy." Clarissa raised an eyebrow. "Did you—" He didn't answer. Clarissa continued. "The passenger you removed, Malcolm Everhart, is not only a high-tier VIP, but a 20% shareholder in Oceanic Airlines through our parent equity group. He also happens to be CEO of the company we're negotiating a $65 million AI services contract with." Marcus turned sharply. "What?" Tanya looked up slowly, the color draining from her face. Clarissa laid it out flat. "You removed a man who had a fully confirmed first-class seat, who complied with every request short of surrendering what was rightfully his, because another passenger, one who tipped, well preferred that seat." No one spoke. Behind Clarissa, the VP of Operations, Harold Stein, remained silent, arms crossed. You know who else saw that? Clarissa added. 16 million people. She pulled up a tablet and played the viral video on mute. The image was brutal, even without sound. Tanya's tight smile. Marcus gesturing toward the aisle. Veronica's dismissive body language. Malcolm's calm voice, captured in perfect clarity. "I'm not moving. This is my seat. It was all there. Unforgiving." Clarissa flipped the video off. There is no ambiguity here. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a breakdown in ethics, in judgment, and it reflects systemic issues we've allowed to fester. Captain Wade spoke first. "We've dealt with disruptive passengers before. But this was different. He wasn't disruptive. He was just still." That silence hung in the room like fog. Tanya finally spoke. "I knew it was wrong," she said softly, "from the beginning. But I didn't know how to stop it without going against my lead." Her voice cracked. "I should have said something." Marcus scoffed. "I was just following standard escalation protocol." Clarissa looked at him sharply. "Standard escalation doesn't involve removing someone for following the rules." Harold finally spoke. The board's already convened. They're furious. Investors are demanding answers. Customers are threatening boycotts. and our general counsel says what happened may have violated multiple federal consumer protections." Wade took off his cap and set it on the table. "Where do we stand?" Clarissa opened the folders in front of them. "In 1 hour, you'll each be placed on administrative leave pending formal review. You're being grounded effective immediately. Your badges are being deactivated. Your union will be notified." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "You're throwing us under the bus." "No," Clarissa said. "You walked into the street." Tanya looked away, tears silently falling down her cheeks. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I really didn't." Clarissa nodded, her voice softening just slightly. "Then maybe you'll help fix it." Marcus stood abruptly and stormed out. Wade followed quietly behind him, eyes low. Tanya remained seated. Clarissa sat down across from her. "You can still take accountability," she said. "It doesn't undo what happened, but it can help us begin repairing the damage." Tanya met her eyes. How Clarissa placed a business card on the table. "Mr. Everhart has created a remediation initiative called Altitude Alliance. His team is requesting voluntary cooperation from staff involved in the incident. Interviews, perspective, transparency." Tanya stared at the card for a long time. Back at the hotel, Malcolm was meeting with Liz Harper, Jamal Wright, and 2 legal advisors in a quiet corner of the executive lounge. The table was scattered with reports, financial impact charts, and real-time social media data. Jamal pointed to the screen. "We just passed 20 million views." Liz looked at Malcolm. "News outlets are calling it the most visible airline discrimination case since cell phone video became mainstream." Malcolm nodded once. His voice was calm. "Let it keep climbing." Liz leaned forward. "We've drafted the shareholder meeting request. It forces them to respond within 72 hours. You'll have the floor." Malcolm adjusted his cuff. "I'm not asking for apologies," he said. "I'm asking for a cultural reset, full crew accountability, a passenger dignity protocol, external audits, and a permanent end to preferential treatment based on gratuity." Jamal smiled faintly. "And the board, they'll comply." Malcolm said, "Because the stock won't survive if they don't." He paused, then added, "And because the world is watching now." Outside the hotel, reporters were already gathering. Inside the airline headquarters, the CEO of Oceanic Airlines was watching the same video. For the 4th time, he reached for the phone and finally called Malcolm Everhart. But this time, it wasn't to request a seat change. It was to ask for help. Morning sunlight spilled across the marble floors of Oceanic Airlines Global Headquarters in Chicago. A building once known for its pristine silence now echoed with nervous footsteps, hurried whispers, and the faint sound of cell phones buzzing non-stop. Behind a row of tinted glass doors, CEO Daniel Whitmore stared at 3 massive screens inside the crisis response room. On the left, a rolling feed of social media outrage. In the center, national news anchors replaying the clip of Malcolm Everhart's removal from seat 1A. On the right, a plunging graph tracking the company's stock value. He adjusted his tie with one hand and rubbed his temple with the other. A single misstep, 1 seat, 1 moment, and now the whole airline was teetering. "Where are we with the board?" he asked, turning to his chief counsel, Julia Byrne. "They're fractured," Julia said. "Some want a public apology. Some want a settlement. Some want to offer Malcolm a role in our DEI division to make it go away." Daniel shook his head. "He's not looking for a role." No, Julia agreed. He's looking for justice. They both turned as an assistant entered, holding a tablet. Sir, the assistant said, we have confirmation. Mr. Everhard has activated the emergency shareholder clause. The board meeting is officially set for Friday morning. He'll be presenting live. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture tightened. He turned back toward the screens. On the broadcast, a split screen now showed Malcolm seated calmly in a pre-recorded interview with CNN. The anchor asked him gently, "Do you believe this was racially motivated?" Malcolm's voice was low and composed. "I believe I was removed not because I broke a rule, but because I refused to accept someone else's comfort as more important than my dignity. That's not just racism, that's cultural conditioning." The anchor leaned in. "What do you want to see happen now?" Malcolm looked straight into the camera. "I want policy, not pity. I want systems that cannot be bent by bias, and I want every passenger, regardless of skin, status, or silence, to be treated with equal respect." The assistant stepped out. Julia broke the silence. "We need a plan." Daniel stared at the screen another beat, then nodded. "Not a PR plan," he said, "a soul plan. We either change now, or we lose everything." At a quiet brunch cafe in Georgetown, Alyssa Montoya sat across from a reporter from the Washington Post. She hadn't planned to speak publicly, but when she saw the company trying to reframe the story, she knew she couldn't stay silent. He never raised his voice. She said, "He didn't curse, he didn't threaten, he didn't even roll his eyes, and they still treated him like a problem." You could see the decision forming the assumption that he should give in because it would be easier. The reporter nodded, scribbling notes. "What made you start filming?" Alyssa sipped her coffee. "I saw how calm he was. I knew the world needed to see it too." The story hit the front page the next morning with the headline, "The Man in Seat 1A, Calm in the Face of Corporate Discomfort." Malcolm read it from his hotel room before his scheduled meeting with the Oceanic legal team. He appreciated the tone respectful, not sensationalized. Jamal texted him 2 words, "Dignity wins." Malcolm didn't smile, but his chest eased. For the first time in days, he breathed without weight. At Oceanic's training center in Dallas, the ripple was being felt differently. Dozens of flight attendants sat in a mandatory ethics seminar, staring at projected footage of the incident. The instructor, a former compliance officer, didn't sugarcoat it. "This is a moment," she said, "that every industry must learn from. It's not about who was technically right. It's about the humanity that was missing in the moment." In the back of the room, Tanya Briggs sat with her arms folded, a legal pad on her lap. She'd been grounded. Yes, but not fired. Not yet. She had chosen to cooperate with Malcolm's remediation initiative, Altitude Alliance. Today's class was the beginning of that choice. During the break, another attendant approached her. "You were on that flight, right?" Tanya nodded. The woman hesitated. "You looked like you wanted to stop it." "I did," Tanya whispered, "but I didn't." The woman nodded solemnly and walked away. Tanya remained seated. She didn't move. She just let the guilt sit with her, not to punish herself, but to understand it, to change it. Meanwhile, Veronica Hale's name had surfaced online. Someone had found her LinkedIn, her company affiliation, her past speaking engagements. The fallout was swift. Her firm issued a statement distancing themselves. Her clients began canceling meetings. The story had caught up to her, too. But, unlike Malcolm, Veronica wasn't being asked for reform. She was being asked to leave. In her Manhattan apartment, she watched herself on the screen, smug, dismissive, eyes rolled, arms crossed. It looked worse than she remembered, and yet it had been real, exactly as she was in the moment. She shut off the screen and poured herself a glass of wine. Outside, her phone continued buzzing, but she didn't answer it. Malcolm's assistant knocked lightly on the door to his hotel suite. "The airline's outside," she said. "They're here early." He stood and straightened his jacket. He wasn't nervous, not anymore. This wasn't about retaliation. This was about evolution. He stepped into the corridor, walking with the same quiet composure that had once been mistaken for compliance. Now, everyone understood what it really was. Strength, the quiet kind, the permanent kind, the kind that no one could remove from any seat, anywhere, ever again. The Oceanic Airlines executive boardroom on the 42nd floor was designed to intimidate. Tall ceilings, soundproof walls, leather chairs spaced precisely. A massive digital screen stretched along the far wall, glowing with the company logo, Oceanic Airlines, the future of air travel. But today, that slogan felt hollow. Today, no one was comfortable. Across the sleek marble table sat 10 of the company's most powerful shareholders, advisors, and board directors. Some had flown in from London and Sao Paulo. Others were patched in remotely from Dubai and Singapore. But all of them were here for one reason: Malcolm Everhart. He entered the room without a smile, without a folder, without an entourage, just himself. A black man in a charcoal gray suit, composed, clear-eyed, silent but not quiet. Daniel Whitmore, Oceanic's CEO, stood to greet him, Mr. Everhart. "Thank you for coming." "I activated the clause," Malcolm replied calmly. "You didn't have a choice." The room tensed, but no one objected. Malcolm took his seat at the end of the table, not at the head, not at the foot, but directly in line with everyone's eyes. Julia Byrne, the legal counsel, nodded respectfully. "We've reviewed the footage, all of it, and internal policy guidelines. We agree the actions taken on Flight 308 were outside of protocol and deeply concerning." Malcolm gave a slight nod. "I didn't request this meeting for an apology." "I understand," Julia said. "We've read your proposal." Malcolm looked around the room. His voice, as always, was measured. "I'm not here to burn the house down. I'm here to fix the foundation, because I believe in air travel. I believe in what it can represent: access, freedom, global connection. But none of that matters if the system only works for people who fit a profile." One of the international board members, a German investor named Dieter, leaned forward. "What do you suggest Malcolm didn't flinch? A 4-tier action plan. 1, mandatory unconscious bias training for all crew, led by third-party instructors who report outside of corporate influence. 2, the immediate termination of gratuity-based seating preferences. If money changes hands, it goes through the system, not into pockets. 3, creation of a passenger dignity task force, co-led by someone outside Oceanic. He paused. And 4, the implementation of Altitude Alliance, full funding, full access, full independence. A silence followed. Someone cleared their throat. Daniel shifted in his chair. "That would cost millions." "It's already cost you more," Malcolm said evenly, pointing to the red stock ticker running along the edge of the screen. "You think these measures will make people feel better?" another director asked. "No," Malcolm said. I think they'll make us better." He stood and walked slowly toward the digital screen. With a tap on the remote, he brought up a split image side-by-side photos of himself on the plane. In one, he was seated, hands folded. In the other, mid-step as he was escorted off the flight. Both showed the same expression. Not anger, not fear, resolve. "This is what the world saw," he said softly. "And no PR campaign, no late-night statement, no settlement can erase it. But what comes next that's still in your hands?" He clicked again. The next image appeared a quote in white letters over black. "You don't change culture with slogans. You change it with courage." Alyssa Montoya had posted that. It had gone viral. Malcolm turned to the board. "I've built systems that manage billions of data points. I've written algorithms that detect bias faster than the human eye. I know what it takes to shift infrastructure. But none of that matters if the people in this room aren't willing to shift themselves." He paused. "I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to listen to what this moment is demanding." Another long silence filled the room. Then, Harold Stein, the VP of Operations, raised his hand slightly. "Altitude Alliance. You want it funded independently, with oversight." "Yes," Malcolm replied. "Who oversees I do," alongside a rotating council of advocates, industry experts, and former passengers. Daniel leaned forward, fingers steepled. "And if we agree to all of this, do you stay?" Malcolm looked at him without blinking. "I stay if we stop pretending that policy alone protects people." Daniel exhaled slowly, then stood. He extended his hand. "Let's build something better." Malcolm took it, firm, no hesitation. Outside the boardroom, the press had gathered. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Everhart, do you feel like you've won?" Malcolm stopped. "No," he said gently. "I feel like we've begun." Behind him, Liz Harper and Jamal Wright watched with quiet pride. Tanya Briggs, standing off to the side, stepped forward slowly. She met Malcolm's gaze. "I've joined the alliance," she said softly. "I know," he replied, and in that moment, there was nothing else to say. Not yet. Because some reconciliation comes in time, not through headlines, but through consistent, silent change. Back inside the room, Julia Byrne turned to Daniel Whitmore. "He just rewrote the future of our company." Daniel nodded. "And maybe," he said, "the future of the whole damn industry." The conference room at Oceanic Airlines headquarters was quiet before the storm. The air conditioning hummed softly, a sharp contrast to the pounding hearts of those inside. Malcolm Everhart sat at the head of the table, flanked by Liz Harper and Jamal Wright. The board members, once skeptical and guarded, now looked attentive, some even tentative, as if grasping the magnitude of the moment. Daniel Whitmore cleared his throat and addressed the room. "This meeting isn't just about one incident on one flight," he said. "It's about who we are as a company and where we want to go." Malcolm nodded, his expression steady. "I want to start by acknowledging the pain and humiliation caused. Not just to me, but to countless passengers who have been made to feel invisible." A woman in the back raised her hand. It was Clarissa Ung from HR. "How will the company ensure this never happens again?" Malcolm leaned forward. "The first step is accountability. Emily Sanders, Marcus Dowell, and Captain Thomas Wade are no longer with Oceanic Airlines. Their actions, or lack thereof, were not isolated mistakes. They reflected a culture that allowed bias to thrive unchecked." The room murmured. Second, Malcolm continued, we're implementing Altitude Alliance. It's not just training. It's an immersive program co-designed with behavioral psychologists, AI experts, and most importantly, those who have lived these experiences. He looked around the table. Change isn't comfortable, but it is necessary. Daniel spoke next. We're suspending all flights for 72 hours to retrain all 12,000 employees. It's costly, but it's a statement. We value dignity over dollars. A board member frowned. What about the unions? They'll push back. Malcolm didn't flinch. They'll push back because this is hard. But the alternative is worse losing public trust, stock value, and worse, our integrity. Liz Harper projected a slide showing customer satisfaction metrics. Since the video went viral, passenger complaints related to bias have increased by 35%, but early indicators from voluntary training sessions show an 80% shift in employee perspectives, Jamal added. The media narrative is shifting. We're no longer seen as a company in denial. We're seen as a company taking responsibility. Malcolm's phone buzzed quietly. He glanced at it and saw a message from Alyssa. The video just hit 30 million views. He smiled faintly. A young board member raised her voice. Mr. Everhart, what about Veronica Hale, the passenger who instigated this? What consequences will she face? Malcolm's eyes hardened. She has been banned for life from Oceanic and all affiliated airlines. Her company placed her on indefinite leave, citing conduct unbecoming. A few in the room nodded in approval. Malcolm shifted gears. This isn't about punishment. It's about education and reform. He pulled out a printed copy of the training framework. We're launching a transparent reporting system. Whistleblower protections will be strengthened. And we're establishing an independent auditing body to oversee all bias-related cases. Daniel added, I will personally chair the newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board. The room filled with nods. Malcolm stood. This meeting isn't just a response to crisis. It's a blueprint for a new era. He looked each member in the eyes. Let's make sure no one else feels the way I did that day on Flight 308. The CEO's voice softened. This is our moment to lead. As the meeting concluded, the weight of what had transpired lingered. Outside the building, reporters waited. Cameras flashed as Malcolm stepped into the light. His statement was brief but powerful. Respect is not a privilege, it is a right. Oceanic Airlines will be a beacon of equity and dignity. This is only the beginning. Back inside. Tanya Briggs sat quietly in a small conference room. Her hands trembled as she read the letter confirming her termination. Tears streamed down her face, but amidst the grief was a flicker of hope. She had joined Altitude Alliance. She wanted to change. She owed that much to herself and to every passenger she had ever served. Months had passed since the incident on Oceanic Flight 308, but the ripples of that day still echoed through every corner of the airline industry. The airline that had once been a symbol of exclusivity and old guard privilege was now cautiously embracing change. Malcolm Everhart watched the progress reports from his office with cautious optimism. The data was encouraging. Complaints about bias and discrimination had dropped significantly. Employee engagement surveys showed new levels of awareness and empathy. But Malcolm knew true change was measured not only in numbers, but in the quiet moments, the subtle shifts in behavior, the private admissions, the changes no one expected to see. At the heart of this transformation was Altitude Alliance, the initiative Malcolm had championed. It was more than a training program. It was a movement, a reckoning with past mistakes, and a roadmap for equity. Tanya Briggs sat in a small classroom within the Oceanic Training Center. Gone were the polished uniforms and scripted smiles. Here, she was simply a woman grappling with her own faults and privilege. Her eyes glistened as she shared her story during a group session. "I was part of the problem," she admitted softly. I knew what was happening on that flight wasn't right, but I was scared to speak up. I was scared of losing my job. I was scared of disrupting the status quo. Across from her, fellow employees nodded, some with tears, others with silent understanding. Emily Sanders, once the flight attendant whose complicity had sparked outrage, now led one of the workshops. Her voice was steady but filled with sincerity. "I made mistakes," she said, "but I've learned that accountability isn't about shame. It's about growth." Malcolm had personally met with Emily, Marcus Dowell, and Captain Thomas Wade before they left Oceanic Airlines. Each had agreed to participate in Altitude Alliance's rehabilitation program. It was not a path of easy forgiveness, but one paved with effort and honesty. Outside the corporate walls, passengers began to notice the difference too. Stories surfaced on social media not just about discrimination, but about moments of genuine kindness and respect. A frequent flyer shared, "I used to dread flying first class because of how I was treated. Now, I feel seen. I feel valued." The boardroom had transformed as well. Daniel Whitmore, the CEO, now an ardent advocate for the program, worked closely with Malcolm and his team. Together, they pushed for transparency and continuous improvement. "It's not a quick fix," Daniel admitted during a company-wide address, "but it's the right fix." Meanwhile, Malcolm continued his own personal journey. The public spotlight that once burned fiercely had softened, yet the burden of representation remained. In quiet moments, he reflected on his father's words. "Strength is not just standing tall, it's standing true." At a recent keynote address titled "Equity in Flight," Malcolm shared his vision for the future of the airline industry. "We must dismantle the invisible barriers," he told a packed auditorium, "barriers built on assumptions, biases, and fear. Only then can we create spaces where every passenger is treated with dignity." Alyssa Montoya, now a close collaborator, worked tirelessly behind the scenes, refining the AI tools that helped monitor and flag bias incidents in real time. Her dedication was a testament to how one quiet action-pressing record could spark widespread change. Back in the Oceanic Lounge, Tanya received a letter of commendation from Malcolm's team for her commitment to change. She folded it carefully, a symbol of her new beginning. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to walk it. Malcolm's vision extended beyond airlines, inspired by the success of Altitude Alliance. Virelink Technologies began consulting with other industries: hospitality, retail, even law enforcement. The message was clear: respect and equity are not optional. They are essential. One evening, Malcolm sat in his study, reading letters from passengers who had experienced discrimination for years but had never found a voice. He paused on one note that read, "Because of you, I flew without fear for the first time." He smiled softly. This was the real victory. Not headlines, not stock prices, but healing, transformation, and the quiet assurance that dignity belongs to all of us no matter where we sit. The sun rose over Atlanta as Malcolm Everhart stepped onto the stage of the city's Grand Convention Center. The crowd's applause was steady, but restrained a quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had led here. He adjusted the microphone and took a slow breath. Today wasn't about him. It was about every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, every passenger who had faced bias at a gate or on a plane, every employee who had felt powerless to speak up, and every company ready to change. Malcolm began 6 months ago. I was removed from a flight not because I broke any rules, but because I refused to give up my rightful seat. What happened next wasn't just about me. It became a movement. He paused, letting the weight of that moment settle over the room. Oceanic Airlines responded with courage. They suspended flights. They retrained staff. They implemented Altitude Alliance, a program designed to root out bias through education, technology, and accountability. Photos flashed behind him images of workshops, training sessions, employees sharing stories. Malcolm smiled gently. Change isn't easy. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary, because equity isn't a destination. It's a commitment. He spoke about the ripple effect, how the movement had spread beyond airlines into hospitality, retail, and beyond. How do we know it's working? Because dignity is no longer a privilege reserved for some, it's a right protected for all. In the audience, Tanya Briggs listened intently, no longer just a former flight attendant. She was now a certified Altitude Alliance instructor. She caught Malcolm's eye and nodded a silent promise to carry this forward. After the speech, Malcolm met privately with Daniel Whitmore and Julia Byrne. "Where do we go from here?" Daniel asked. Malcolm smiled. "Forward. Together, transparency, ongoing training, and most importantly, listening. Really listening to those whose voices have been ignored," Julia added. "We're also launching an independent oversight committee. No more internal cover-ups." Malcolm's phone buzzed. A message from Alyssa Montoya. Next phase is ready. Their work was far from over. Later that evening, Malcolm returned to his hotel room. He sat by the window and reflected on the journey, the pain, the resistance, the victories. He thought of his father's words once more. Justice isn't about breaking things down. It's about building something stronger. He opened a letter that had arrived earlier, a heartfelt note from a young black girl who had watched the viral video and found hope. "I want to be a pilot someday," she wrote. "Because of you, I believe I can." Malcolm smiled. The story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to every person who dared to stay seated when told to move, to every person who fought for dignity in the face of discomfort, and to every person who believed in a better horizon. The journey ahead would be long. There would be setbacks, resistance, and hard conversations. But Malcolm was ready, because he knew that change, real change, was possible, not just in the sky, but everywhere. Malcolm Everhart's story is a reminder that dignity isn't granted, it's demanded. It's about standing tall when the world expects you to sit down. It's about challenging systems that favor entitlement over equity and rewriting the rules for future generations. What happened on that flight wasn't just a fight over a seat. It was a fight against prejudice, a stand for justice, and a call to see every person's humanity. As we close this chapter, remember that discrimination still thrives in hidden corners, but courage and compassion have the power to shine light and spark change. Let's honor those who stand up, listen with empathy, and hold systems accountable. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. If Malcolm's story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire and demand justice. Together, we can keep the conversation alive and work toward a world where no one is ever told they don't belong.